A millionaire sabotaged a cook in a restaurant in a cruel way to humiliate her in front of everyone. What the cook did left everyone speechless. Charlotte Walters stood at the kitchen counter, her hands expertly kneading dough while the rich scent of herbs and spices filled the small, cozy kitchen of her family's restaurant. The clatter of pots and pans echoed softly in the background, accompanied by the steady hum of conversation from the dining area just beyond the swinging doors. This place was more than just a restaurant. It was a part of her soul, a living memory of the woman who had taught her everything about food, passion, and life, her grandmother. The restaurant, nestled in the heart of a quaint little town in Vermont, was far from glamorous, but it had character. Wooden beams lined the ceiling, giving the room a rustic charm, and the walls were adorned with framed photographs of the restaurant's history. It had been in the family for generations, and every inch of the place held a memory. It was here that Charlotte had spent countless hours as a child, helping her grandmother prepare meals for the locals. The older woman had a natural gift for turning simple ingredients into extraordinary dishes, and Charlotte had inherited that gift. "Cooking is about love, Charlie," her grandmother used to say with a warm smile, her wrinkled hands chopping vegetables with precision. "If you put love into your food, people will feel it." Those words stayed with Charlotte every day. Now in her late 20s, she had taken over the restaurant after her grandmother's passing. Running it wasn't easy, the business wasn't booming, and in a town as small as theirs, competition was fierce. But Charlotte was determined to keep the legacy alive, no matter the cost. As she worked, Charlotte could hear the door chime as another customer entered. A gentle smile crossed her face, knowing that it was probably one of the regulars. The restaurant had built a loyal following over the years, mostly locals who appreciated the home-cooked meals that reminded them of simpler times. It wasn't the kind of place where you'd find fancy dishes or Michelin stars, but it was real, and it was hers. The lunch rush was winding down, and Charlotte wiped her hands on her apron before pushing through the kitchen doors to greet the guests. As she stepped into the dining area, her eyes scanned the familiar faces, exchanging nods and smiles. It was a typical afternoon, or so it seemed. But something in the air felt different today, as if change was looming just beyond the horizon. She couldn't put her finger on it, but a feeling of unease settled in her chest. She brushed it off, focusing instead on the task at hand, serving people good food, just like her grandmother had always done. "Hey, Charlotte," called Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman who had been coming to the restaurant for as long as Charlotte could remember. "That soup you made today, it's just like your grandma's. Perfect." Charlotte's smile widened. "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. I'm glad you liked it. That recipe's been in the family for years." The older woman chuckled softly, her eyes twinkling with nostalgia. "It's why I keep coming back. You don't get food like this anywhere else." For Charlotte, that was the best compliment anyone could give her. She returned to the kitchen, her spirits lifted by the exchange. Despite the challenges of keeping the restaurant afloat, moments like these made it all worthwhile. It reminded her that she wasn't just cooking. She was preserving a piece of her family's history, one meal at a time. But as the afternoon turned into evening, and the last of the customers trickled out, Charlotte found herself alone in the quiet kitchen, her thoughts wandering. The unease from earlier crept back in, more persistent now. Something was going to change. She could feel it. Her intuition proved right when the phone rang, jolting her from her thoughts. Wiping her hands on her apron, she grabbed the receiver, the familiar crackle of the line filling the silence. "Hello, Charlotte Walters speaking." "Miss Walters?" came a smooth, unfamiliar voice. "This is Vincent Caldwell. I believe we need to talk." The name struck a chord, and Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. Vincent Caldwell was a name that carried weight, a powerful businessman from Boston, known for his ruthless tactics in the real estate market. What could he possibly want with her? "I'm sorry, Mr. Caldwell, but I don't think I understand," she said cautiously. "I've recently acquired your restaurant," Vincent replied, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "And I have some exciting new plans for it. We'll need to meet to discuss the details." Charlotte's heart sank. Acquired? How could he have bought the restaurant without her knowing? Panic surged through her veins as the reality of the situation began to settle in. Her family's restaurant, the one place she had poured her heart and soul into, now belonged to someone else. I wasn't aware of any sale," she stammered, gripping the phone tighter. "There's a lot you weren't aware of, Miss Walters. I suggest we meet tomorrow. Noon. I'll be at the restaurant." And with that, the line went dead. Charlotte stood frozen in place, the phone still pressed to her ear, as the weight of what had just happened crashed over her like a wave. Vincent Caldwell, a man she had never met, now owned her family's legacy. And tomorrow, she would have to face him. Charlotte barely slept that night. Her mind raced with thoughts of what the next day would bring. She kept replaying the phone conversation with Vincent Caldwell in her head. The way he had so casually mentioned acquiring the restaurant, as if it were just another piece in his vast collection of properties. How could this have happened? She had been so focused on running the business and keeping the legacy alive, she hadn't even considered that her family might have been in financial trouble before her grandmother's passing. Morning came too soon, and Charlotte found herself standing in front of the restaurant, her heart pounding in her chest. The crisp Vermont air did little to calm her nerves as she waited for Vincent's arrival. She glanced at the old wooden sign above the door, Walter's Eatery, and a pang of sadness washed over her. This place was everything to her, and now, it felt like it was slipping through her fingers. Right at noon, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The door opened, and out stepped Vincent Caldwell. He was exactly as she had imagined, a tall, sharply dressed man with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. His tailored suit and polished shoes looked out of place in the rustic surroundings, but Vincent didn't seem to notice or care. He moved with purpose, like a man who was used to getting what he wanted. "Miss Walters," Vincent greeted her, extending a hand as he approached. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Charlotte hesitated for a moment before shaking his hand, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied him. "Mr. Caldwell," she replied, her voice steady but cold. Vincent gave a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He glanced around the exterior of the restaurant, taking it all in with an air of detached interest. "Charming little place you have here," he said, though his tone suggested he didn't mean it as a compliment. Charlotte corrected him. "It was my family's place. Now, apparently, it's yours." Vincent's smile widened slightly, but there was no warmth in it. "I understand this must be difficult for you," he said, his voice smooth and calculated. "But I think you'll find that the changes I'm planning will be beneficial for everyone involved." "Changes?" Charlotte's stomach twisted at the word. "What exactly are you planning to do with this restaurant?" Vincent folded his arms, surveying the building once more. "It's simple, really. This restaurant has potential, but it's far too small scale for what I have in mind. I'm planning to turn it into a high-end dining experience, exclusive, refined, something that will attract the elite crowd from Boston and beyond. You've done a fine job running it up until now, but I'm afraid there's no room for amateurs in what I'm envisioning." Charlotte's fists clenched at her sides. The audacity of this man, standing there in his expensive suit, talking down to her like she was some novice who didn't understand the first thing about running a restaurant. She had poured her heart and soul into this place, just like her grandmother had. How dare he dismiss everything she had worked for so easily? "And where exactly do I fit into all of this?" Charlotte asked, her voice laced with defiance. Vincent raised an eyebrow. "You're welcome to stay on as a chef, of course," he said casually, "but you'll need to adapt. The kind of cuisine we'll be serving here will be a far cry from the rustic home cooking you're used to. I'll have my team bring in new staff, new menus, and of course, a new direction for the restaurant." Charlotte felt a lump forming in her throat, but she refused to let it show. "So, I just give up everything that makes this place special, everything my grandmother built." Vincent sighed, as if he were dealing with a child who didn't understand the ways of the world. "Miss Walters, this is business. Sentimentality has no place here. Your grandmother may have built this place, but it's time to evolve. You can either be a part of that evolution, or you can step aside." His words hit her like a punch to the gut. Everything about the way he spoke, the way he carried himself, screamed that he was in control. But Charlotte wasn't ready to give up that easily. She had fought too hard to keep the restaurant going, and she wasn't about to let Vincent Caldwell waltz in and tear it all down. "I'm not stepping aside," Charlotte said firmly, her voice steady despite the turmoil she felt inside. "This place is more than just a business to me. It's my life." Vincent's expression remained neutral, but there was a flicker of something, amusement, in his eyes. "Very well," he said after a moment. "I admire your determination, Miss Walters, but I think you'll find that in the end, it's not enough. The event I'm planning will determine the future of this restaurant. You'll be the chef for the evening. Consider it your opportunity to prove that you belong in the new direction we're heading." Charlotte stared at him, her mind racing. This was her chance, but it was also a trap. She could feel it. If Vincent was putting her in charge of the event, there had to be a catch. Still, she couldn't back down now. "Fine," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. "I'll cook, but don't expect me to compromise on what I believe in." Vincent's smile returned, cold and calculating. "I wouldn't dream of it." With that, he turned and walked back to his car, leaving Charlotte standing in front of the restaurant, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and determination. The battle lines had been drawn. She didn't know exactly what Vincent was planning, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to let him take her down without a fight. The day after her unsettling meeting with Vincent, Charlotte was still reeling from the encounter. His arrogant tone, his dismissive attitude, it all left a sour taste in her mouth. Yet, here she was, about to walk into another meeting with him, hoping to gain more clarity about what exactly he intended for the restaurant. When she stepped inside, she was immediately greeted by Vincent's assistant, a sleek, efficient-looking woman who seemed as cold and professional as her boss. "Miss Walters, Mr. Caldwell is waiting for you," she said, barely making eye contact as she gestured toward the private dining room in the back. Charlotte took a deep breath, steadying herself before pushing the door open. Vincent sat at the head of the table, reviewing some documents, looking as if he belonged there. He glanced up briefly as she entered, offering a curt nod. "Miss Walters, glad you could make it," he said, his voice smooth but devoid of warmth. "I didn't have much of a choice, did I?" Charlotte replied, her tone sharper than she intended. Vincent didn't seem fazed. He leaned back in his chair, clasping his hands together. "You're right. You don't have much of a choice. But let's not pretend this is entirely out of your control. I'm giving you an opportunity here, one most people would kill for." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "And what opportunity is that, exactly?" "To be a part of something bigger than yourself," Vincent said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "I'm offering you a chance to stay on as the head chef in the new restaurant I'm planning. But it won't be the same place you've been running all these years." Charlotte's heart sank at his words. The restaurant, her grandmother's legacy, would be unrecognizable. But she wasn't ready to let go. "Not yet." Vincent continued. "I've already secured investors, and the renovations will begin next month. The menu will be reimagined, the clientele will be higher end, and the whole concept will be elevated to attract a more affluent crowd." "So, what? You want me to cook for the elite of Boston and pretend that I'm okay with it?" Charlotte shot back, her frustration bubbling to the surface. Vincent's expression didn't change. He remained calm, as if he had expected her reaction. "I understand this is difficult for you, but sentimentality doesn't pay the bills. Your family's restaurant has been surviving, not thriving. I can take it to the next level, and you can come along for the ride, or you can walk away." Charlotte's mind raced. She knew he was right about one thing. The restaurant had been struggling. The town was small, and while the locals loved the place, it wasn't enough to keep things afloat forever. Still, the thought of handing over control to someone like Vincent, who saw the restaurant as nothing more than a business venture, was unbearable. "What if I don't want to come along for your ride?" she asked, her voice quieter now, more contemplative. Vincent tilted his head slightly, his gaze unwavering. "Then you can leave. I'm not forcing you to stay. But let me be clear. If you leave, the restaurant will change with or without you. I've already made up my mind about that." The words hit her like a blow to the chest. He wasn't bluffing. This wasn't some negotiation where she could fight for a middle ground. Vincent Caldwell had made his decision, and the future of the restaurant was already sealed. The only question was whether she would be part of it or not. "There's one thing I don't understand," Charlotte said after a long pause. "Why me? Why keep me on at all if you're so intent on turning this place into something completely different?" Vincent's eyes flickered with something, interest, maybe even respect. "Because you're talented, Miss Walters, and I'm not in the habit of letting talent go to waste. Your cooking has potential, real potential, but it's being squandered here. I can offer you more than this town ever could." Charlotte clenched her fists under the table. The truth of his words stung. She had dreams of becoming a renowned chef, of creating dishes that would be remembered. But not like this. Not under these circumstances. "I'm not willing to sacrifice everything this place stands for," she said, meeting his gaze head-on. "My grandmother built this restaurant on family values, on hard work, on love for the people who come here. You can't just wipe that away." Vincent sighed, leaning forward slightly. "I'm not asking you to sacrifice everything. I'm asking you to evolve. You can keep your values, but you have to adapt to the world we live in. The culinary industry is cutthroat, Miss Walters, and if you don't adapt, you'll get left behind." Charlotte remained silent, her mind spinning with thoughts of what to do. She hated that Vincent was right, about the industry, about the restaurant's financial struggles. But she also hated the idea of bending to his will. She needed time to think, to figure out her next move. "I'll cook for the event," she said finally, her voice steady. "But I'm not making any promises beyond that." Vincent smiled, a small, triumphant curve of his lips. "That's all I need for now." As Charlotte left the meeting, her head was buzzing with uncertainty. Vincent's plan was already in motion, and she felt like a small boat being swept along by a powerful current. She didn't know where it would lead, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to give up without a fight. The days leading up to the event were a whirlwind for Charlotte. The restaurant, which had always been a place of comfort and familiarity, now felt like foreign territory. Workers hired by Vincent were coming in and out, rearranging furniture, discussing renovations, and making it clear that the place was about to undergo a massive transformation. Charlotte watched it all with a mixture of frustration and helplessness. As the day of the event drew closer, she threw herself into her work. The kitchen had always been her sanctuary, the one place where she felt in control, but even that was being disrupted. Vincent had hired a new sous chef to assist her with the preparations, a move that felt more like an insult than a gesture of support. The sous chef, Liam, was skilled and professional, but he was also distant, making it clear that he wasn't there to be her friend. He followed Vincent's orders, and that made him part of the enemy in Charlotte's eyes. Still, she had to admit that he knew his way around a kitchen. The two of them worked side by side in silence, preparing for the event that would either make or break her career. Charlotte spent hours poring over the menu, trying to find a balance between her style of cooking and the high-end cuisine that Vincent was pushing for. It was a delicate line to walk. She wanted to stay true to her roots, to the simple but flavorful dishes her grandmother had taught her. But she also knew that the guests coming to the event would expect something more refined. Her head buzzed with ideas, and her hands moved with practiced precision as she prepped ingredients, tested sauces, and fine-tuned every detail. There was no room for error. This event wasn't just about showcasing her talent. It was about proving to Vincent and to herself that she belonged in this world. The night before the event, Charlotte stayed late in the restaurant, long after the workers had gone home. The kitchen was quiet, save for the rhythmic sound of her chopping vegetables. The stillness of the night offered her a rare moment of peace, a brief respite from the storm that was Vincent Caldwell. As she worked, Her mind drifted back to her grandmother. She could almost hear the older woman's voice, calm and reassuring, telling her that everything would be all right. Charlotte had always found comfort in her grandmother's words. But now, standing in a kitchen that no longer felt like hers, the doubt crept in. "Can I really do this?" she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible in the empty room. The weight of the situation pressed down on her. The stakes were high and failure wasn't an option. Vincent was counting on her to impress his wealthy guests, but Charlotte knew that his motives were far from supportive. This wasn't just about the event, it was about control. If she failed, it would give him the perfect excuse to push her aside, to turn the restaurant into whatever cold, sterile vision he had in mind. She wouldn't let that happen. The following morning, the restaurant was buzzing with activity. The event was only a few hours away, and everything had to be perfect. The kitchen staff moved with military precision, preparing for the arrival of the elite guests. Charlotte could feel the tension in the air. Everyone knew how important this night was, not just for the restaurant, but for their jobs. Vincent made several appearances throughout the day, checking in on the preparations, offering curt nods of approval but saying little. His presence put Charlotte on edge, a constant reminder that this was his game, and she was merely a player in it. She hated the way he looked at the restaurant, as if it were nothing more than a blank canvas for him to paint over. But there was no time for resentment. Charlotte had work to do. She moved through the kitchen like a whirlwind, giving instructions, checking every detail, and making sure that everything was in place. The menu was ambitious, a mix of traditional dishes with a modern twist, but she had faith in her skills. This was her chance to show what she could do, to prove that she didn't need Vincent's vision of high-end dining to create something extraordinary. As the clock ticked closer to the start of the event, Charlotte felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. This was what she lived for: the challenge, the pressure, the opportunity to create something beautiful out of raw ingredients. It was what had drawn her to cooking in the first place, and despite the circumstances, she was determined to make the most of it. By late afternoon, the restaurant was transformed. The tables were set with crisp white linens, soft candlelight flickering from elegant centerpieces. It looked nothing like the warm, rustic eatery that Charlotte had grown up in. Instead, it had the polished, refined air of a high-end restaurant in the city. It wasn't her style, but she had to admit, it was impressive. Vincent's team had outdone themselves in creating the perfect ambiance for the event. The guests would be arriving soon, and Charlotte could already feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on her. But she wasn't going to let it break her. Just as she was finishing a final check of the kitchen, Vincent appeared in the doorway, his sharp eyes scanning the room. "Everything in order?" he asked, his tone businesslike. Charlotte wiped her hands on her apron and nodded. "We're ready." Vincent's lips curled into a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Good. Let's make sure tonight is a success, for both of our sakes." Charlotte didn't respond. She didn't need to. She had her own definition of success, and it wasn't the same as Vincent's. The first guests began to arrive shortly after, the dining room filled with the murmur of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the occasional burst of laughter. Charlotte stayed in the kitchen, focused on the task at hand. She knew that the moment of truth was coming, and she would be ready for it. No matter what Vincent had planned, she was going to make this night her own. As the guests settled into their seats and the air buzzed with the anticipation of the evening's menu, Charlotte stood in the kitchen, running through the final steps of the meal preparation in her mind. Her nerves were under control, her focus sharp, but beneath the calm exterior was a storm of uncertainty. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The kitchen staff moved with swift efficiency, preparing the first courses while Charlotte oversaw each detail. Her heart swelled with a strange mixture of pride and apprehension. This was her chance, but it was also a test. She had to impress these guests, not just to save the restaurant, but to prove to herself that she belonged in the culinary world. Then it happened. As Charlotte stepped away to check on the dessert station, Liam, the sous chef Vincent had hired, approached her with a frown. "We've got a problem," he said in a low voice, careful not to let the other staff hear. Charlotte's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" Liam handed her a small tray. "The ingredients for the main course. They've been switched." For a moment, Charlotte couldn't comprehend what she was seeing. The fresh, high-quality fish she had specifically ordered for the main course was gone, replaced by a cheaper, inferior substitute. Her mind raced as she processed the implications. This wasn't a mistake, it was sabotage, and she knew exactly who was behind it. "Vincent," she whispered, her voice thick with anger. Liam looked uncomfortable but nodded. "I thought something was off when the delivery came in, but I didn't question it. I'm sorry, Charlotte." Charlotte's thoughts spiraled. She had meticulously planned every dish on the menu, carefully balancing flavors and ingredients to create something truly special. And now, with the wrong fish, the entire dish would fall apart. She clenched her fists, fighting the rising tide of panic. This was exactly what Vincent wanted, to see her fail, to humiliate her in front of his elite guests. But she wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. Charlotte took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. There had to be a way out of this. She quickly scanned the kitchen, taking stock of what was available. Time was running out. She needed a solution, and fast. "I can fix this," she said to herself, her voice barely audible. She turned to Liam, her mind already racing through possibilities. "We don't have time to get new fish, but we'll work with what we've got. I'll change the sauce and use a different technique to highlight the flavors. It's not what I planned, but it'll have to do." Liam nodded, immediately jumping into action as Charlotte gave out instructions. They had to move quickly. The main course needed to be ready within the hour, and any delay would be noticed by the guests. Charlotte's heart raced as she worked, improvising on the fly, adjusting the recipe with the ingredients on hand. As she poured her focus into the new dish, the clamor of the kitchen faded into the background. For Charlotte, this was a familiar dance, a balancing act of flavors, textures, and timing. She had been in difficult situations before, but none quite like this. Yet, despite the odds, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. This was her domain. No matter what Vincent threw at her, she knew she could rise above it. The new dish began to take shape, and as the clock ticked down, Charlotte could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The tension in the kitchen was palpable, but no one said a word. They all knew what was at stake. Finally, with minutes to spare, the plates were ready. Charlotte stood back, surveying the final product. It wasn't the dish she had planned, but it was still hers. A creation born from necessity, but crafted with the same care and attention to detail she always poured into her food. She hoped it would be enough. As the servers began carrying the plates out to the dining room, Charlotte watched from the kitchen, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the moment of truth. The guests would soon be tasting the main course, and their reactions would determine the success or failure of the evening. The first few minutes felt like an eternity. Charlotte strained to listen for any sign of approval or disappointment from the dining room, but all she heard was the clinking of silverware and the quiet murmur of conversation. Then, the silence was broken by something unexpected. Applause. Charlotte blinked in surprise, her breath catching in her throat. She stepped closer to the kitchen door, peering out into the dining room. The guests were clapping, nodding approvingly as they tasted the dish. One of the guests, a well-known food critic, stood up and raised his glass in a toast. "To the chef," he announced, his voice carrying across the room. "This is one of the finest meals I've ever had the pleasure of tasting." The words hit Charlotte like a wave of relief, and a small, incredulous smile tugged at her lips. She had done it. Despite Vincent's sabotage, despite the impossible situation, she had not only saved the evening, she had triumphed. Back in the kitchen, the staff exchanged glances of disbelief, and Liam gave Charlotte a nod of respect. "You pulled it off," he said quietly. "I don't know how, but you did." Charlotte didn't have time to revel in the victory, though. She knew Vincent wouldn't be pleased with the outcome. His plan to humiliate her had backfired, and that meant he would be looking for another way to undermine her. But for now, she had won this battle. Just as she was about to return to her work, Vincent appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face a mask of cold control. He didn't look angry, at least not on the surface, but there was a dangerous glint in his eyes. "Well done, Miss Walters," he said, his voice dripping with insincerity. "I must say I didn't expect you to recover so quickly from the mix-up with the ingredients." Charlotte met his gaze, refusing to back down. "I'm a professional, Mr. Caldwell. I always have a backup plan." Vincent's smile was thin, barely concealing his frustration. "It seems so. But don't get too comfortable. There's still a long way to go, and not every obstacle will be so easy to overcome." Charlotte held her ground, her heart still pounding with adrenaline. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." Vincent didn't respond. He simply turned and walked away, leaving Charlotte standing in the kitchen, victorious but wary. She knew this wasn't over. Vincent was a man who didn't take defeat lightly, and there would be more battles to come. But for tonight, she had won, and that was enough. As the applause faded and the guests settled back into their conversations, Charlotte stood in the kitchen, her pulse still racing. She had pulled off what felt like a miracle, turning a sabotage into a triumph. But the night wasn't over yet, and she knew that Vincent wouldn't let this small victory go unnoticed. There was something calculating about the way he had looked at her after the dinner service, a coldness that hinted at more trouble to come. Charlotte took a deep breath and tried to refocus. The evening was still in full swing, and there was more work to be done. Dessert would be served soon, and despite the success of the main course, she couldn't afford to relax just yet. She went back to work, overseeing the plating of the final course, her mind replaying the events of the night over and over. The kitchen staff had fallen into a quiet rhythm, everyone aware of the tension but too professional to let it affect their performance. Liam worked beside her, his expression unreadable as he carefully added the finishing touches to the desserts. "You did good out there," he said quietly, without looking up from his work. Charlotte glanced at him, surprised. Liam had been mostly silent throughout the evening, focused and professional but distant. This was the first time he had acknowledged the chaos they had just survived. "Thanks," she replied, her voice soft. "I couldn't have done it without you." He gave a small nod, still not meeting her eyes. "We're not done yet. Let's make sure dessert goes off without a hitch." Charlotte appreciated the sentiment. She had expected resistance from Liam, given his connection to Vincentry, but he had stepped up when it mattered. Maybe he wasn't as loyal to Vincent as she'd thought. As they worked, the dining room began to quiet down, and Charlotte could hear snippets of conversation filtering through the kitchen doors. The guests were still discussing the meal, praising the dishes, and marveling at the unexpected twist of flavors in the main course. She couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. Despite everything, her food had spoken for itself. When the desserts were finally plated and sent out, Charlotte allowed herself a brief moment to exhale. The hardest part of the evening was over, and the guests seemed satisfied. But even as the tension in her body began to ease, she couldn't shake the feeling that something else was coming. Just as she turned to clean up, the kitchen door swung open, and Vincent strode in. His presence was like a cold wind blowing through the room, chilling the atmosphere instantly. Charlotte braced herself, knowing that whatever he had to say, it wouldn't be good. "Miss Walters," he began, his voice smooth and controlled. "It seems you've managed to impress our guests tonight. Congratulations." There was no warmth in his words, only a thin veneer of professionalism. Charlotte stood her ground, wiping her hands on her apron as she faced him. "I did what I had to do," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "The guests came here expecting a good meal, and that's what I gave them." Vincent's lips curled into a small, tight smile. "Yes, you did. But I wonder how long you can keep this up." Charlotte narrowed her eyes, sensing the threat behind his words. "What's that supposed to mean?" Vincent took a step closer, lowering his voice so that only she could hear. "This was just the beginning, Miss Walters. You may have gotten through tonight, But there are bigger things coming. This restaurant is changing whether you like it or not, and I'm not sure you're ready for what's next." Charlotte's stomach twisted, but she refused to let him see her fear. "I'm not going anywhere, Mr. Caldwell. This restaurant means something to me, something more than just a business deal. I'll be here, no matter what you throw at me." Vincent's eyes flickered with amusement, but there was an edge of something darker beneath it. "We'll see about that," he said quietly. "For now, enjoy your little victory, but don't get too comfortable." With that, he turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Charlotte standing there, her heart pounding with a mixture of anger and resolve. She had expected this. Vincent wasn't the kind of man to back down easily, but neither was she. If he thought he could scare her off with veiled threats and sabotage, he was wrong. Liam approached her cautiously after Vincent left, his expression more relaxed now that the tension had lifted. "What was that about?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Charlotte shook her head. "Nothing I didn't already expect. Vincent's not done trying to push me out." Liam sighed, leaning against the counter. "Yeah, I figured as much. He's not the kind of guy who takes defeat lightly." Charlotte looked at him, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "Why do you work for him, Liam? You're talented. You could be cooking anywhere. Why stay tied to someone like him?" Liam was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the floor. Then he shrugged. "It's complicated. Vincent's got connections, and in this industry, that matters. But I'm not blind to who he is. I know what he's capable of." Charlotte studied him for a moment, trying to read the emotions behind his guarded expression. "You don't have to be part of this," she said softly. "If you ever want out, you don't have to stay." Liam gave her a half smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I appreciate the offer, but it's not that simple. I've got my reasons." Before Charlotte could press him further, one of the waitstaff entered the kitchen, holding a glass of champagne. "Miss Walters," she said, offering the glass with a smile. "The guests wanted to send their compliments to the chef." Charlotte took the glass, feeling a rush of gratitude despite the lingering tension in the room. The guests were happy, and that was what mattered most. She raised the glass slightly, offering a silent toast to the hard work of her team, and took a small sip. The bubbles danced on her tongue, and for a brief moment, the weight of the night lifted. But as the evening wound down and the guests began to leave, Charlotte knew that this was far from over. Vincent had made it clear that tonight was just the first step in his plan, and she had no doubt that there would be more challenges ahead, but she was ready for them. She had survived this far, and she wasn't going to back down now. The night had been a whirlwind of emotions, but as the last few guests lingered over their desserts, Charlotte finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. The clinking of silverware and quiet murmur of conversations in the dining room filled the air, but the chaos of the kitchen had settled into a calm, steady rhythm. The main course had been a success despite everything, and dessert had gone out without a hitch. Still, Charlotte couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled deep in her gut. Vincent had made his intentions clear. He wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. But tonight, she had managed to hold her ground. For now, at least. She watched from the edge of the kitchen as the waitstaff cleared the last of the dishes, her heart pounding in time with the ticking of the clock on the wall. The end of the night was near, and soon, she would have to face Vincent again. She didn't know what he had planned next, but one thing was certain. He wasn't happy with how things had turned out. The dining room was nearly empty now, just a few stragglers finishing their drinks and exchanging pleasantries. The evening had been a success, at least from the guests' perspective. They had enjoyed the food, praised the atmosphere, and seemed none the wiser to the sabotage that had taken place behind the scenes. But Charlotte knew better. She knew that Vincent's sabotage had been intentional, a calculated move to push her to the edge, and yet she had come out on top. The satisfaction of that victory was tempered by the knowledge that Vincent wasn't done yet. As the last guest left the restaurant, Vincent made his way back into the kitchen, his expression unreadable. He walked with the same air of control that Charlotte had come to expect from him, his eyes scanning the room as if he were assessing every detail. Charlotte braced herself, unsure of what was coming next. "Well," he said after a long pause, "you managed to pull it off. I'll admit, I'm impressed." His words were polite enough, but there was an edge to them, a sharpness that made Charlotte feel as though she were still walking a tightrope. She met his gaze, her own expression guarded. "I told you I wouldn't let this restaurant fail," Charlotte said, her voice firm but not hostile. "I did what I had to do." Vincent smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Indeed. But don't think for a moment that this means you've won." Charlotte's heart skipped a beat, but she refused to let him see her fear. She had come this far. She wasn't going to back down now. "I'm not interested in winning," she replied. "I'm interested in keeping this restaurant alive, and if you think you can scare me off, you're wrong." Vincent's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating look. He took a step closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "You may have survived tonight, Miss Walters, but this is just the beginning. There's more at stake here than you realize. And if you're not careful, you'll find yourself out of this kitchen sooner than you think." Charlotte's stomach churned, but she held her ground. She wasn't about to let him intimidate her, not after everything she had been through tonight. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice steady. Vincent studied her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. Then, with a small shrug, he stepped back, his expression returning to its usual mask of calm indifference. "We'll see," he said coolly. "For now, enjoy the rest of your evening." With that, he turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Charlotte standing there, her heart still pounding in her chest. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to release all the pent-up frustration and fear that had been building inside her since the moment Vincent had walked into her life. But she knew that wouldn't do any good. Instead, she took a deep breath and forced herself to focus on the task at hand, cleaning up and closing the kitchen for the night. The staff moved around her, quietly finishing their duties. Liam caught her eye as he wiped down one of the counters. "You all right?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Charlotte nodded, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. "Yeah," she said, her voice thick with exhaustion. "I'm fine." Liam didn't press her. He simply nodded and went back to work, his presence a small comfort in the otherwise tense atmosphere of the kitchen. As the last of the staff filed out, leaving Charlotte alone in the quiet, dimly lit room, she finally let herself collapse into one of the chairs by the prep station. Her body ached from the long hours of work, and her mind was spinning with everything that had happened over the course of the night. She had survived. That was the important thing. But as she sat there, staring at the empty kitchen, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Vincent wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep fighting him. For the first time since the night had begun, Charlotte allowed herself to feel the full weight of her exhaustion. She rested her head in her hands, letting the silence of the room wash over her. The adrenaline that had fueled her throughout the evening was wearing off, leaving her feeling drained and vulnerable. But as tired as she was, Charlotte knew one thing for certain: she wasn't giving up. She had come too far to let Vincent take this from her. No matter what he had planned next, she would be ready. With a deep breath, Charlotte pushed herself to her feet and began the slow process of shutting down the kitchen. The night was over, but tomorrow would bring new challenges, and she would face them, just like she had faced everything else, with determination, grit, and the knowledge that this restaurant was more than just a business. It was her life, her legacy, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. The morning after the event felt different. The quiet streets of the small Vermont town were still, as if the world had taken a collective breath. But inside the Walters family restaurant, the weight of the previous night's battle lingered. Charlotte arrived early, her body aching from the exhaustion of the night before, but her mind was sharper than ever. She had done it, despite Vincent's sabotage, Despite all the odds stacked against her, she had triumphed. The applause of the guests still echoed in her ears, the taste of victory bittersweet on her tongue. But today wasn't about celebration. It was about moving forward. Charlotte stepped into the kitchen, her sanctuary, and took a deep breath. The familiar scent of fresh herbs and spices grounded her, reminding her of why she had fought so hard. This was her place, her domain, and no one, not even Vincent Caldwell, was going to take it from her. As she began organizing the kitchen for the day's work, the door chimed softly. Charlotte looked up to see Liam standing in the doorway, a small, respectful smile on his face. "Morning," he said, his voice calm but carrying a note of admiration. "You're here early." Charlotte shrugged, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "There's always work to be done." Liam stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room before landing on her. "I wanted to say, last night, you really pulled it off. That was impressive." "Thanks," Charlotte said, her tone neutral. She appreciated the compliment, but her mind was already on the next step. She couldn't afford to bask in the glory of one night's success, not when Vincent was still looming like a storm on the horizon. "Vincent didn't expect you to recover like that," Liam added, leaning against one of the prep tables. "He was sure you'd fall apart." Charlotte looked at him, her gaze steady. "I've dealt with worse than Vincent Caldwell." Liam chuckled softly. "I don't doubt that. But be careful. Vincent doesn't like to lose. He'll come at you harder next time." "I know," Charlotte replied, her voice unwavering. "But he's not going to win." Liam studied her for a moment, then nodded, as if coming to a silent agreement. "If you ever need anything, help, advice, whatever, I'm around." Charlotte raised an eyebrow, surprised by the offer. There had been tension between them since Liam had arrived, a sense that he was more loyal to Vincent than to her, but maybe she had misjudged him. "I appreciate that," she said, her voice softer now. "Thanks." Before the conversation could go any further, the door to the restaurant swung open again, and Charlotte's heart sank. Vincent. He strode in with the same air of confidence he always carried, but there was a stiffness to his posture that hadn't been there before. Last night's failure had clearly affected him, though he hid it well. "Miss Walters," he said, his voice as smooth as ever. "A word, if you don't mind." Charlotte straightened, wiping her hands on her apron as she stepped forward. "What is it, Mr. Caldwell?" Vincent's gaze flicked briefly to Liam, who took the hint and left the room without a word. Now, it was just the two of them. The air between them felt thick with tension. "I've had some time to reflect on last night's success," Vincent began, his tone carefully measured. "And I must admit, I underestimated you." Charlotte crossed her arms, waiting for him to get to the point. "Is that so?" Vincent's smile was tight, almost forced. "You managed to impress some very important people, and while I may not agree with your methods, I can't deny the results." The guests were pleased, more than pleased. Charlotte said nothing. She could feel that there was more coming, something he wasn't saying yet. Vincent stepped closer, his eyes narrowing slightly. "But don't think for a second that this changes anything. One successful night doesn't make you untouchable. This restaurant is still mine, and we're going to make the changes I've planned." Charlotte felt the familiar anger rise inside her, but she kept her expression calm. "You may own the building, but the heart of this place, what makes it special, belongs to me, and I'm not going to let you turn it into something it's not." Vincent's jaw tightened, the mask of civility slipping just enough to show the frustration beneath. "You think you can stand in my way? You're one person, Charlotte. This is a business, not a personal crusade." "I don't care what you call it," Charlotte shot back, her voice firmer now. "This restaurant has been in my family for generations. It's not just a business to me, it's everything. And if you think I'm going to sit back and let you destroy that, you don't know me at all." For a moment, Vincent said nothing. The two of them stood there, locked in a silent standoff, neither willing to back down. Finally, Vincent broke the silence, his voice low and cold. "You're making a mistake, Miss Walters. And when this all comes crashing down, don't say I didn't warn you." With that, he turned and left, his footsteps echoing through the empty dining room as he walked out the door. Charlotte let out a slow breath, her heart still pounding in her chest. She knew this wasn't over. Vincent was more determined than ever to reshape the restaurant into his vision, and he wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. But neither was she. As the door swung shut behind Vincent, Charlotte felt a renewed sense of purpose wash over her. She wasn't alone in this fight. She had her team, her skills, and the legacy of her grandmother driving her forward. And no matter what Vincent threw her way, she would find a way to keep going. Stepping back into the kitchen, Charlotte picked up a knife and began chopping vegetables, the rhythmic motion calming her mind. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't done yet. This restaurant, this dream, was hers, and she was going to protect it with everything she had. The days following the event passed in a blur of routine and simmering tension. Charlotte kept her head down, focusing on running the restaurant while trying to anticipate Vincent's next move. The sabotage during the dinner had shaken her, but she refused to let it distract her from her goals. She knew that Vincent wouldn't stop until he had full control of the restaurant and its direction, but she was determined to resist him at every turn. It wasn't until a week later, during a quiet afternoon shift, that things began to shift in an unexpected way. Charlotte was in the kitchen, preparing for the evening service, when an older woman entered the restaurant. She had an air of familiarity, her silver hair tied back neatly, and her eyes sharp but kind. Charlotte didn't recognize her at first, but there was something about her presence that felt oddly comforting. The woman approached the counter, her gaze sweeping over the restaurant with a look of recognition before settling on Charlotte. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice warm and steady. "I was wondering if you might be able to help me. I'm looking for someone who used to work here a long time ago." Charlotte wiped her hands on her apron and stepped forward, curiosity piqued. "I've been working here most of my life," she replied. "Who are you looking for?" The woman smiled, a hint of nostalgia in her eyes. "Her name was Miriam Walters. I believe she was your grandmother." Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't heard anyone mention her grandmother's name in years, at least not outside of her own family. The connection between her and the stranger suddenly felt much more significant. "Yes, she was my grandmother," Charlotte said softly, her voice laced with emotion. "But she passed away a few years ago. How did you know her?" The woman's smile deepened, a touch of sadness now behind it. "I used to come here many years ago, when your grandmother ran the place. I was friends with her and someone else who used to come here often." Charlotte frowned, her curiosity growing. "Someone else?" The woman hesitated, as if weighing how much she wanted to reveal. Finally, she spoke again, her tone softer now. "I was close with Vincent Caldwell, back when he was much younger." Charlotte's heart skipped a beat at the mention of Vincent's name. She had known that Vincent had a connection to the restaurant, but she had never known the details. Now, standing in front of the stranger, it was as if the past was slowly beginning to unravel in ways she hadn't anticipated. "Vincent?" Charlotte repeated, her voice incredulous. "He never mentioned anything about knowing my grandmother." The woman sighed, her eyes clouded with memories. "I'm not surprised. It's not something he talks about. You see, Vincent and your grandmother were once very close. I don't know the full story, but there was something between them, a connection that he's never fully let go of." Charlotte stood there, stunned. Her grandmother and Vincent? It didn't make sense. Vincent was cold, calculating, a man who seemed incapable of genuine emotion. The idea that he had shared something meaningful with her grandmother seemed impossible. "I had no idea," Charlotte whispered, her mind racing. "He's been trying to take control of the restaurant, to change everything. Why would he want to do that if he cared about her?" The woman gave a sad smile. "People change, my dear. Vincent has become someone very different from the young man I once knew." But there's a part of him that still holds on to the past, even if he doesn't realize it. This restaurant, it's more than just a business to him. It's a connection to a time when things were simpler, when he wasn't so caught up in power and control. Charlotte shook her head, struggling to make sense of it all. So why is he trying to ruin everything? Why does he want to take this place away from me? The woman reached out and gently placed a hand on Charlotte's arm. Because he doesn't know how to let go. He's trying to mold the restaurant into something that fits the life he leads now, not the life he once had. But deep down, I think he's afraid. Afraid that if he doesn't change it, he'll be forced to confront the memories and emotions he's been running from for so long. Charlotte stared at the woman, the pieces of the puzzle slowly falling into place. The connection between Vincent and her grandmother was deeper than she had realized. And now, it seemed that this restaurant represented more than just a business opportunity for him. It was a link to the past, a past that he was struggling to reconcile with his present. I don't know what to do, Charlotte admitted, her voice thick with emotion. I've been fighting him every step of the way, but I had no idea about any of this. The woman gave her a kind, understanding look. You have to decide what's more important to you, the fight or the legacy your grandmother left behind. Vincent may be difficult, but he's not beyond reason. If you can find a way to remind him of what this place truly means, maybe you can reach him. Maybe you can save both the restaurant and his connection to your grandmother. Charlotte took a deep breath, her mind racing with possibilities. She had been so focused on protecting the restaurant from Vincent's influence that she hadn't considered the possibility of finding common ground. Could she really reach him? Could she remind him of the person he once was and the connection he had to her grandmother? It was a long shot, but it was better than continuing down the path of constant conflict. The woman gave Charlotte's arm a gentle squeeze before turning to leave. I hope you find what you're looking for, she said softly. Your grandmother was a wonderful woman. She believed in you, just as she believed in this place. Don't forget that. As the woman disappeared through the door, Charlotte stood alone in the quiet restaurant, her mind swirling with thoughts of the past and the future. She had always believed that this fight was about protecting the restaurant from Vincent's greed, but now she wasn't so sure. There was more at stake here than just a business. This was about family, legacy, and the ties that connected them all, and maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to find a way to save it all. The revelation about Vincent's past weighed heavily on Charlotte's mind for days. The connection between him and her grandmother had changed everything. She could no longer see him as just a cold businessman determined to ruin her life. Now, he was tied to her family's legacy in ways she hadn't anticipated. But knowing that didn't make things any easier. Vincent's relentless drive to transform the restaurant still felt like an attack on everything Charlotte held dear. She had fought him for so long that the idea of finding common ground seemed impossible. Yet, after the conversation with the older woman, Charlotte knew she had to at least try. One evening, just before closing time, Charlotte made a decision. She would confront Vincent, but this time, it wouldn't be about accusations or anger. She needed to understand his side, to reach the part of him that still cared, if it even existed. The next morning, Charlotte waited for Vincent to arrive at the restaurant. He was always punctual, his visits like clockwork. When he walked in, his usual air of confidence and control seemed less imposing than before. She watched him for a moment, steeling herself for what she was about to do. "Vincent," she called from the kitchen doorway. He looked up, surprised to hear his name spoken without the usual edge of defiance in her voice. "Charlotte," he replied, his tone cautious. "Can we talk?" she asked, stepping out from behind the counter. "I think it's time we had a real conversation." Vincent raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued but wary. "What about?" Charlotte gestured toward one of the empty tables in the dining room. "About the restaurant, about my grandmother, about what's really going on here." Vincent hesitated for a moment before nodding. "All right," he said, his voice steady. He followed her to the table and sat down across from her, his expression guarded. Charlotte took a deep breath, unsure of how to begin. "I spoke to someone recently," she started slowly, watching Vincent's reaction. "She knew you. Knew you when you used to come here, back when my grandmother ran the place." Vincent's eyes flickered with recognition, but he said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "She told me about the connection you had with my grandmother," Charlotte went on, her voice softer now. "About how close you two were. I didn't know any of this before." Vincent's posture stiffened slightly, his jaw tightening. "That was a long time ago," he said, his voice quieter than usual. Charlotte nodded. "I get that. But I also know that this restaurant isn't just some business deal for you. It's tied to something from your past, something you haven't let go of." For a moment, Vincent said nothing. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and strained. "Your grandmother, she was one of the only people who ever really believed in me. Back when I was nobody, trying to figure out who I was and what I wanted from life, she treated me like I mattered." Charlotte felt a pang of emotion at his words. This was a side of Vincent she hadn't expected to see, a vulnerable, human side that was hidden beneath layers of ambition and control. "I never told her how much that meant to me," Vincent continued, his gaze fixed on the table in front of him. "By the time I was in a position to really make something of myself, she was gone. And this restaurant, it's the only piece of her that's still here." Charlotte's heart ached for him. She had spent so long seeing Vincent as the enemy, as the man who was trying to destroy everything her grandmother had built. But now, she could see that his actions, misguided as they were, came from a place of unresolved grief and guilt. "Why didn't you ever tell me this?" she asked gently. "I've been fighting you every step of the way, but if I'd known—" Vincent cut her off, shaking his head. "Because it doesn't matter," he said, his voice firm again. "What I'm trying to do here isn't about the past, it's about the future. This restaurant, it has potential, but it's stuck in the past. I wanted to turn it into something more, something bigger." "But at what cost?" Charlotte asked, her voice rising slightly. "You're trying to change everything that makes this place special. The heart of this restaurant. It's not about high-end dining or catering to the elite. It's about the people, the history, the memories." Vincent leaned back in his chair, his expression conflicted. "I thought that if I made it successful, if I turned it into something grand, it would honor your grandmother's memory. But maybe I've been going about it the wrong way." Charlotte sighed, feeling the weight of the conversation settle over her. You don't have to turn it into something it's not to honor her. She wouldn't have wanted that. She believed in simple things, good food, good people, and a place where everyone felt welcome. Vincent was silent for a long time, his eyes downcast. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, almost resigned. "I think I lost sight of that. I've been so focused on what this place could be that I forgot what it already was." Charlotte watched him carefully, seeing the shift in his demeanor. For the first time, he wasn't trying to control the narrative, to bend the situation to his will. He was just Vincent, a man who had made mistakes, who had pushed too hard, but who was finally beginning to see things clearly. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, the words catching her off guard. "I've been fighting you, trying to force my vision on you and this restaurant, but I see now that I've been wrong." Charlotte blinked, taken aback by his apology. She had expected resistance, more conflict, but instead, she was faced with something she hadn't anticipated: regret. "Thank you," she said softly. "I wasn't expecting you to say that." Vincent gave a small, tired smile. "Neither was I." They sat in silence for a moment, the tension between them finally easing. Charlotte felt a sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't a perfect resolution. There was still a lot to figure out, a lot of wounds to heal, but it was a start. "So what now?" Charlotte asked, her voice hesitant but hopeful. Vincent looked at her, his eyes clearer than they had been in weeks. "Now, we figure out how to move forward. Together. If you're willing to work with me, we can find a way to make this restaurant a success without losing what makes it special." Charlotte nodded slowly, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. "I'm willing." As they stood up from the table, a new sense of possibility hung in the air. The fight wasn't over, but it had changed. It was no longer about control. It was about collaboration. And for the first time since Vincent had come into her life, Charlotte felt like they were on the same side. The days following Vincent's apology were marked by a sense of cautious optimism. For the first time since the battle for the restaurant had begun, Charlotte felt that they were moving in the right direction. It wasn't easy, and old habits died hard, but there was a shift in the air, a sense that they were working together rather than against each other. Vincent's presence in the restaurant became less of a looming threat and more of a partnership. He still had his business-minded approach, always thinking of ways to grow and expand, but now he actually listened to Charlotte. The tension between them, once thick and unyielding, had softened. They discussed menus, marketing strategies, and even minor renovations to the restaurant, all with a focus on preserving the heart of what the place stood for. One afternoon, as Charlotte worked on a new recipe in the kitchen, Vincent walked in, carrying a stack of papers. His suit was as sharp as ever, but there was a different energy about him, calmer, more grounded. "Got a minute?" he asked, setting the papers down on the counter. Charlotte wiped her hands on her apron and turned to face him. "Sure, what's up?" Vincent hesitated for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about the other day," he said slowly. "About your grandmother, about this restaurant, and about what I've been trying to do." Charlotte raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. "I'm not going to lie," he said, running a hand through his hair. "It's hard for me to let go of the idea of turning this place into something bigger. I've spent my whole life building things up, making them successful. But I realize now that success doesn't always mean making things bigger." Charlotte nodded, sensing where this was going but wanting him to say it out loud. "I don't want to take over this place anymore," Vincent said finally, his voice quiet but firm. "I want to help you. I want to make this restaurant the best version of what it already is, not what I thought it should be. I was wrong to push my vision on you. This is your legacy, Charlotte, not mine." For a moment, Charlotte didn't know what to say. She had spent so long fighting Vincent, so long preparing for battle after battle, that the idea of him stepping back and supporting her felt almost surreal. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw sincerity there, an earnest desire to make things right. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't think I'd ever hear you say that." Vincent smiled, a genuine smile this time, the kind that reached his eyes. "Neither did I. But I'm learning." They stood there in the kitchen for a moment, the weight of the past few weeks slowly lifting. Charlotte could feel the change between them, the shift from adversaries to something more like allies. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't be easy. But it was progress. And that was enough for now. As they began to work together, the restaurant flourished. Vincent used his connections to bring in new customers, while Charlotte stayed true to the heart and soul of the place, ensuring that every meal was made with the same care and attention her grandmother had always given. The combination of their strengths, Vincent's business acumen and Charlotte's culinary expertise, proved to be exactly what the restaurant needed. Word spread quickly, and soon, Walter's Eatery became more than just a beloved local spot. People from neighboring towns and even from Boston began making the trip to Vermont just to experience the magic of the restaurant. The rustic charm remained, but there was a new energy now, a sense of excitement and possibility that drew people in. One evening, after the dinner rush had ended and the last of the customers had left, Charlotte stood outside the restaurant, gazing up at the old wooden sign that had hung there for decades. The soft glow of the streetlights illuminated the name, Walter's Eatery. It was more than just a business. It was a legacy, a piece of her family's history, and now, a part of her future. Vincent stepped out to join her, standing quietly by her side. For a moment, neither of them spoke, both lost in their thoughts. "You've done something incredible here," Vincent said after a while, his voice soft. "Your grandmother would be proud." Charlotte smiled, a mixture of pride and gratitude swelling in her chest. "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without you." Vincent chuckled softly. "I didn't make it easy on you, did I?" Charlotte laughed, shaking her head. "No, you definitely didn't. But in the end, we figured it out." They stood there for a moment longer, the quiet of the evening settling around them. There was a sense of peace now, a calm after the storm that had raged between them for so long. As Charlotte looked around at the small town she had grown up in, at the restaurant that had shaped so much of her life, she felt a sense of closure. She had fought for this place, for her grandmother's legacy, and in the end, she had won. But more than that, she had found a way to move forward, not by holding on to the past, but by embracing the future with open arms. And as for Vincent, he had found something too, a connection to the person he used to be, a way to honor the woman who had once believed in him. He was no longer just a businessman trying to build an empire. He was part of something real, something meaningful. Together, they had created something that neither of them could have done alone. "I think we did something good here," Charlotte said quietly, glancing over at Vincent. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Yeah, I think we did." As they turned to head back inside, Charlotte felt a warmth settle over her. The fight was over. The restaurant was thriving. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could finally breathe. The future was bright, and whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she wasn't facing them alone.